Bachelor Dankovsky is a doctor, a man of science. But what he finds in the town of the Gorkon will test not only his education and intellect, but his ethics and morality as well. Welcome back, everyone, to another Pathologic update video. Today, Ice Pick Lodge remembered they have a Twitter and posted a release date for Pathologic 3's demo and prelude, Pathologic 3 Quarantine. To start us off on today's video, I'm going to go over what we know so far about Pathologic 3 Quarantine and Pathologic 3 Quarantine's new trailer, and what we can infer from it. To wrap up, I will go into any theories or tinfoil hat conspiracies we can gather from today's trailer. There is so much to sink our teeth into with the Pathologic franchise, so I'm excited to get to theorizing. To begin though, I will be doing a high-level overview for the sake of time, but if you'd like to see a more in-depth analysis, I have a video going over this pretty intensely. Link for both of those will be in the description below. So, what do we know so far? From the previous announcement of Pathologic 3 Quarantine, we gathered a few important points and set pieces that will be relevant for Quarantine. We gathered this from the photos and from what the Steam page described in the info for the game. The photos we saw highlighted the following: a photo from the main Steam page of the Executioner and what I assume will be the Plague Finder, a photo of the Capitol, a photo of the Rod and of Clara, a scene of Yulia and Daniil looking at a few designs, and a photo of the train tracks near Notkin and Bad Grief's hideout, as well as a bull. We also saw the Broken Heart Cafe and Peter Stomaton. After reflecting on everything we've learned since Quarantine was announced, looking at you, Devlog 2, I believe these photos are highlighting scenes of relevancy for our dear Bachelor. We know he is part of the Utopian gang with Yulia and Peter, which explains their appearances. We know the Plague Finder will be a huge source of gameplay for the Bachelor, and one of the biggest iconic figures in Pathologic is the Executioner, and just the general plague aura you see in infected districts, which explains the first photo. The biggest draw in for older fans of the franchise will be getting to see the Capitol, as we know Quarantine will at least in part be placed there, which explains the second photo. And then we have Clara and the Rod. I am pretty stumped on this one, as my Pathologic Classic lore brain is pretty much empty, but I do have a few ideas I'll discuss later on in the theories section. Moving on to the Steam page itself. In my original video, I compared both Steam pages for Pathologic 3 and for Pathologic 3 Quarantine, as they had corresponding sections. There's not much to say about this bit without sounding redundant, but I will give you what I concluded from my comparison. This will be a tutorial of sorts to familiarize us with the tools Dr. Dankovsky will use once he arrives to the town on the Gorkon. It will also give us a peek behind the curtains of what exactly is at stake here for Dr. Dankovsky, and I believe we will learn more about what I believe to be the actual villain, or one of the many villains, I guess, other than the whole plague thing happening. That villain being the powers that be. Now that we're all caught up on what we think we know so far, let's dive into the real meat of today's video, the trailer itself. Today, not only did we get a release date for Pathologic 3 Quarantine, March 17th, 2025, but we also got an accompanying trailer showing us what we might be able to expect from Quarantine. The trailer starts off with a high-intensity soundtrack. This really stuck out to me, as in I feel like with every video trailer we've had prior to this, it's had this almost slow and creeping music that builds in intensity, whereas in this one we pretty much jump right into the chaos. I previously assumed gameplay for Quarantine would be capital focused and more explanatory, but this makes me think it may not be. Granted, the soundtrack could just be a marketing tactic rather than an indication of the gameplay, but I guess we'll see. We see some already seen footage from other trailers at the beginning. The hospital, the infected districts, the gun gameplay, and what appears to be a Shabnok crawling out of the ground. Trust me, we are going to get to the Shabnok later. But for now, bear with me. Then we see a tree. I have no idea what the fuck is going on with this tree. I have not seen it in game. It looks to be near the cathedral and the Crucible, which is the Kane's establishment, so I don't really know. No thoughts, no notes. Okay, IPL. Then we see more Plague Finder and gun gameplay with some more footage of the Shabnok that we were told about in Devlog 2. Then we shift focus and see some newer footage. A fiery looking creature on a train, and then a fiery looking amalgamation of what appears to be a woman at a very interesting location. This location is where we see Murky's questline in Pathologic 2, where Artemy can speak with Clara or the Changeling and become infected in Murky's place. This, I believe, is a direct reference to a theme between Classic, Pathologic 2, and Pathologic 3. In Classic, you were playing the same format with slight differences in gameplay and a lot of differences in text dialogue, just 3 times over. Pathologic 3 has been stated on several occasions to be a game based on Daniil's perspective in mind. Thus, he will be interacting with the plague differently and he will be seeing things differently, which is what I think is responsible for the difference in gameplay we see. In the most recent devlog, we discovered that Daniil will have the chance to fight the plague. They even make the reference to a Shabnak, and because of the way it's stated, it is my assumption that the plague will be taking on the form of a Shabnak for Daniil. We see that footage in the devlog video and in the first few seconds of the quarantine trailer. I go more into depth on this in my devlog video, which that link will be below, but I believe the main reason Daniil will have the opportunity to physically fight the plague is because he has a different relationship with death than Artemy does. If we assume that the plague can be likened to death, then we can view the plague's representation in Pathologic 2 and Pathologic 3 through the lens of the main characters of each game and their relationship with death. Artemy comes from a very grounded and spiritual culture that appears to have a very natural and understanding relationship with death. He's obviously adverse to the plague as it is attacking the town, but he has a much more accepting perspective of it than, I don't know, the dude trying to literally cure death would. Death has always been Dankovsky's greatest adversary, as his entire life's research is based around preventing death. So it makes sense that whereas Artemy converses with the embodied representation of the plague and death, Daniil is literally trying to shoot it. That being said, we see the plague Shabnak representation, but we also see something very different. We see that fiery-looking being attacking Dankovsky, or appearing to attack him. What is very important about this is the location. In Classic, Sticky comes to the Bachelor to tell him he has found a Shabnak. When Dankovsky gets there, it is an albino, another steppe creature. The steppe creature tells him to stay away, as it will only talk with its friend Clara, naturally. I believe this falls in line with the differences between Artemy and Daniil's relationship with the steppe culture. The day Daniil steps off the train, the steppe does not appear to like him, and he grows to understand this as the game goes on. He can be attacked within the first few seconds of gameplay by a worm, as Bachelor, Dankovsky, and Classic. They do not appear to like him. He will begin to see anything in this game steppe-oriented as an adversary as he grows to understand how they view him. Whereas in previous games, the albino has looked like this, we are now in the shoes and mind of Bachelor Dankovsky, and we'll be seeing the steppe as Bachelor Dankovsky grows to view it, as something that greatly dislikes him and doesn't want him there, thus indicating why he would see the albino and why the albino, from his perspective, would be attacking him. This is just a theory, and it's one that I talked to my good friend Make extensively about. Make sure you go follow her on Twitter. But I don't know. I'm not really sure about it. It's too different from the footage we've gotten of the Shabnak, so I don't think it's another Shabnak or a Shabnak plague representation, but the location is just too specific. So I don't know. I do think it's an albino, but I guess we'll see. I have no idea why this is in a trailer for Quarantine, a game that is supposed to be like a prelude to the main game. I don't know why we would see a creature in a location you encounter on day 6 during Pathologic Classic in a trailer for the prelude to Pathologic 3. I don't know any of this. I really don't. But I guess we'll see. Okay, IPL. After all of that exposition, we then hear from the man himself, speaking to, I believe, capital people. He has returned from hell, and we see a giant wheel barreling towards what appears to be a familiar place to Dankovsky, as we have seen this location in a few different places, in the devlog video as well as in the audio showcase that IPL was a part of. It was alluded to in the audio showcase that the cathedral was the main hub of time travel, and this wheel that is barreling towards what I am going to start calling Dankovsky's hub looks to be the steering wheel in this time travel mechanic we see in the audio showcase, except obviously now it is much bigger and barreling towards capital citizens, and Dankovsky's main hub in the capital. One of the plays you can see in Pathologic 2 at the theater contains discussion of a wheel of time, and truthfully, I've not seen this play, so I don't really know exactly the contents of it in regards to the horror specs, other than, from what I could understand, he has a much more grounded and wholesome understanding of the wheel of time and how it continues on, which is a big theme in the horror specs' route. I think it's really interesting that there is a wheel of time travel in Dankovsky's route, obviously, with the wheel being part of that main time travel mechanic that we see in the cathedral, but instead of the grounded, wholesome understanding that Artemy has of it, it is barreling towards Dankovsky, directly to the hub of his life, the capital, ready to ruin his life. Granted, I don't know if it's meant to imply it's going to ruin his life, but it does seem to change it drastically. So if I were to wager a guess, that is what IPL is referring to with this part of the trailer. We then get another point of view of the interview we see at the beginning of Pathologic 3's trailer, where I am not sure of this man's name, I'm gonna be honest. Throughout my script, I wrote him as Fuckface, but I don't want YouTube to hate me, so I'm gonna call him Blondie. Where Blondie is interviewing Dankovsky on his failures. This also gives us some info on how and why Dankovsky arrived to the town on the Gorkin. He dropped everything, his research, his life, to go to this town as he was seeking an immortal man who had died by the time he got there. Then a fever engulfs the town, and as the sole physician, Dankovsky did what he could to save the town. I think this bit really highlights that Dankovsky finds much of his identity in being a doctor, which is then challenged once he gets to this incurable sand pest. Side note, the bit where he goes, "I declared a quarantine." Honestly, super iconic. Pop off, Danny boy. Blondie then implies that him declaring a quarantine was to keep outsiders from interfering with him spreading the sand plague, and reminds him he failed. Dankovsky's response here confirms a couple of gameplay mechanics we discussed in Devlog 2. Every day, Dankovsky will have to use the already infected people to develop a vaccine for the rest of the uninfected population, except the plague will mutate every day, with some citizens being the unfortunate infected guinea pigs. The patients, they deceived me. Part of Dankovsky's gameplay will be interviewing patients and investigating their claims. Are they being honest about their symptoms? Are they lying about their lifestyle? We will have to visit their home and interview them, and potentially their neighbors as well, to verify their claims and thus further our research. Then this last bit. I'm a doctor, a man of science. And Blondie responds with, I wonder if you even know who you are anymore. I've discussed this in previous videos, but I believe one of the main plot elements in Daniil's story will be the breakdown of his identity as a doctor and a physician. He declares that he is a doctor and a man of science, but he failed when those identities and skills were put to the test. Who is he outside of that? Then we are reminded of the time travel mechanic. If you could begin anew, would you make the same choices? I love that they've highlighted that here, as the devlog didn't really touch on it as much. We end the trailer with Daniil going, but something I would change, and then trailing off. And then we get some very goofy looking footage of a clock, and that is it. The trailer was so epic, and I think we learned a couple of core things from it. Firstly, not to toot my own horn, but I do think this trailer confirms one of my longtime theories since the original Pathologic 3 trailers drop. Similar to how the beginning of Pathologic 2 shows Artemy the town's fate if he fails, I believe the beginning of Pathologic 3, and the ending of Quarantine in a way, will be this interview with Blondie. Similar to the Pathologic 3 trailer, we hear this conversation between Blondie and Dankovsky recounting his failures. Except, in the Quarantine trailer, it gets a lot more personal and detailed. My original thought was that Quarantine would be to lay the groundwork of the powers that be and what exactly is at stake here for Daniil as he approaches his 12 days in the town from hell. I still stand by that, but I'm not really sure how that will look with this interview. My guess for Pathologic 3 is you start out seeing what the interview will look like when you fail. Then, similar to what happens at the end of the Quarantine trailer, you will travel back in time to re-examine your choices and begin jumping around the timeline of these 12 days. Maybe, just maybe, you see this interview or bits of it in Quarantine, then travel so far back you start before Daniil even sets foot in the town while he's still at the capital. I'm not sure. I'm a bit stumped, but I'm still really excited for what we're going to see. Secondly, this game is going to be decision-focused, same as Pathologic 2, but it will be decision-focused from Daniil's perspective and the areas of the game he is involved with. We will see how certain actions have certain consequences, but we will be able to travel around the timeline to change our choices and affect the outcomes. We could have inferred this game will be decision-oriented based on how Pathologic 2 runs and how Pathologic Classic runs, but I think Quarantine's trailer puts emphasis on it, which I personally enjoyed. Next, I'm going to get into Tin Hat Land and Theoryville because I still have theories. That being said, I don't think any of my theories have really changed since the last time I put my tin hat on, so I'm going to put the footage here from my last video to summarize my thoughts. But this is where I'm going to start to get into Theoryville, so if you were looking to watch a video without putting on your tinfoil hat, this is your time to switch off. So I'm going to try to condense this in a logical way, but I'm a little pushed for time here, so I am sorry if it doesn't really make sense, but I think it's going to. I'm reading off of a script that I wrote with nothing but 2 cups of coffee and me in a dream, so surely this will flow as I'm intending it to. But to get started, right? The absolute first thing I noticed when looking at Quarantine's Steam page is the game's similar tab. What do you know? It is similar to the Outlast Trials, a game that I played quite a bit. I played it on release, but then it turned into a drinking game for me and my friends. So the majority of my gameplay has been spent drunkenly arm wrestling, but I have played through and released a reagent in the Outlast Trials and played both of the previous games. When I saw this, I thought, I haven't been blacked out in the Outlast Trials lobby in a while. Maybe we should change that. And then I was like, I guess this is kind of a weird comparison, but both are psychological horror, so I guess that makes sense. I wonder if this is the same for the Pathologic 3 Steam page. Then I checked that, and Pathologic 3 is not similar to Outlast Trials. It is similar to Sons of the Forest. Like I said, I've played Outlast Trials. I've also played a good bit of Sons of the Forest and watched a lot of content on it. None of them line up gameplay mechanic-wise to what we've been told about Pathologic 3 or Quarantine. Unless in Quarantine, the powers that be are actually a deranged cop with vague sexual inclinations chasing you down, then the math isn't quite mathing on the game mechanic front. So I thought, let's look at what we know about the Sons of the Forest plot and what we know about Dankovsky. In Sons of the Forest, you are arriving to an island to rescue a rich family after their resort has absolutely gone to shit. So you have a mission, but once you get there, you realize some crazy science shit has been happening, which ties back into the first game, The Forest. And your mission then becomes surviving and solving what happened to the resort and to these people you were supposed to save. It turns out, which, spoilers for Sons of the Forest here, that the family that you were there to save fell victim to the science craziness. And then your next mission becomes escaping the island. But the only way to do this is through getting to the bottom of what is going on at the island. In Pathologic 3, I think we'll see something similar. The arrival in town to complete one goal, proving immortality, then everything falling to shit immediately. And the only way out is going through solving what is going on. Obviously, this is, again, overgeneralized, but I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. We're going in a direction. What makes the prequel different in terms of plot that would not also relate it back to the Sons of the Forest in terms of similarity, right? Do you see what I'm saying here? I hope so. So I could be a little off my rocker here, but the powers that be are mentioned in Quarantine Steam page, whereas they are not in Pathologic 3's. In Pathologic 3, I think we will obviously be focused on the plague in front of us, but in Quarantine, I think we're going to get, like I've already said, a huge look behind the curtain on what is setting up the main plot in Pathologic 3 and by proxy in Pathologic 2. Now to the big tin, but put your bigger tinfoil hat on. I'm sorry in advance. In Outlast Trials, the game that is, according to Steam, similar to Quarantine, you can volunteer, or are more likely snatched off the street, to go through a series of trials. These are run by the Murkoff Corporation, which would be the quote-unquote powers that be in the Outlast universe. They put you through physically and emotionally brutal trials and then grade you on your performance. At the end of the trials, you are then sent off into the world as a sleeper agent in a Cold War. The main lessons being taught during these trials are how to be obedient, how to be controlled, how to be manipulated, and how to receive direction from the Murkoff Corporation. They are essentially emotionally and physically abusing you to mold you into someone they can use in the real world to puppeteer events. This is what I want to hone in on, especially the puppeteering events piece. In Quarantine, I think we're going to get a front row seat to them doing this to Dankovsky for whatever their end goal gain is. I don't know what the end goal gain is. I'm not going to go for the low-hanging Cold War fruit because I'm not entirely sure that is what IPL is wanting to reference here. Could be wrong, but we also get the inclination and knowledge in Pathologic 2 that the plague was supposed to be a trial for the townspeople and the town as a whole. Isidore, in his letter to Artemy, even says that there's a difficult trial happening in the town. We know Isidore and Simon had knowledge of this and were intent that it should happen for the sake of the town itself. What if, though, they were not the only ones who had prior knowledge of this? They were invested in the outcome of this trial to the point that they were willing to die for it. But what is the outcome? What is the end goal? What is the purpose of this? Obviously, that might look different to Artemy versus the Bachelor or Isidore versus Simon. But I also wonder if the powers that be were involved in the orchestrating of this. They obviously seem to have some sort of animosity with Dankovsky and his research, but what if that's just a front? What if that's just a bluff? I know the tinfoil hat is on, but if the powers that be are the Murkoff Corporation of this world, and I think we will see that this entire quote-unquote trial and experiment was meant for something more than just the elevation of the town. I think we're going to get a sneak peek. I don't know if we're going to get what it was for. I don't think they would drop that much into a demo of a game that hasn't released yet. But I do think we will see a little more about the powers that be, that they are way more involved in the town of the Gorkon than we may have originally thought. And maybe we'll see what their overall intention for Dankovsky is. I think we'll certainly see them in less of a Dankovsky's weird bosses, light, and more of a bigger world power who's using whatever happens in these 12 days to apply elsewhere in the world sort of lens. Or maybe they're taking what they learned from the town on the Gorkon to use in the capital. I don't really know. But I think that there will be a strong similarity or tie-in between the Murkoff Corporation and the way they function in the Outlast universe and the way the powers that be are functioning in the Pathologic universe. Or hear me out, they're both just psychological horror, and I have rambled for the last 10 minutes for absolutely nothing, which I think, with how my luck tends to go, might actually be the case. That being said, whew, thank God that bitch is done talking. I thought she'd never shut up. Full disclaimer, so I went back and added all of that from a previous video that I did when Quarantine was initially released, or announced, excuse me, and there are so many, for lack of a better term, typos in that video. I think it's because I was really short on time when I made it, and obviously as I've made more videos, this process has become more streamlined. But yeah, so sorry in advance. If you are interested in the theory talk, pretty much all of it is in this video, so no need to go watch that one. One tidbit that I know I put it in a video somewhere, but I do not remember what video for the life of me. And I've been working on this video, this one you're listening to right now, since I got off of work at 5:30. And it is now 12:30. And so I'm not going to go look for it. I'm just going to tell you the last bit that I want to talk about before we call it. So one of the main conundrums that I think we have in Quarantine is, or at least that I have with Quarantine's Steam page, is why in the fuck is Clara advertised there? Why is Clara and the rod in the Steam photos? It is more than likely just IPL being like, woo, look, you're going to see Clara, someone I know we've wanted to see more of for a while. But in the previous little bit of footage you just watched about me theorizing, my theory is that the powers that be, and maybe Simon Kane, and also Isidore Burak, I think they were all in on it together. Obviously, we know Simon... Spoilers for Pathologic 2. Obviously, we know Simon and Isidore were kind of like... This was a bit of a collab project, you know what I mean? Not a very good one, but... I mean, I guess that's up in the eyes of the viewer. I'm sure they were, I think, happy with it. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. But I think the powers that be have to be involved in what's going on somehow. And I know there's something about the powers that be actually being two little kids in a sandbox. I'm not talking about that. I can't go there. I don't have the marbles for it. I mean the powers that be as Dankovsky's bosses from the Capitol, and the way we understand them inside the four walls of this universe. No breaking the fourth wall, as the game, enjoys doing. So I think they're all kind of in on it. I could be, again, I know I'm probably wrong, but just bear with me. And I think the reason Clara is included in the Steam Quarantine photo page, I don't know if we'll see her in Quarantine, I highly doubt it, but I think there's something to do with the fact that no one expected her, right? So the Canes obviously kind of work with Daniil once he gets to the town. Isidore kind of summons him, but Isidore also is in charge of summoning Artemy back to the town. They've done a lot of work to get all of these major players to this town for these 12 days. But who the fuck anticipated, for lack of a better term, God, just waking up in a grave one day and arriving as well? And I know I'm being a little crass here. It's probably because I'm coming on hour 7 of working on this video, or hour 6 or hour 5. I'm not sure. Anyways, I know I'm being a little stupid. But I think I think we're going to learn a little bit more about Clara and the origins that she has with the town. And full transparency, I haven't played Classic. It's something I'm aiming to do before the full release of Pathologic 3. And so I know there's a little bit of Clara lore I'm probably missing here. But I think there's something else to do with her there. And I think she's the piece of the puzzle they didn't really anticipate. So I think maybe we'll see a little bit more of that and how it may affect what the powers that be, Simon Kane and Isidore Barak, were planning to begin with. But, oh my god, this has gone on long enough. I need to go to bed. If you've watched it to this point, thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I love making these types of videos. I know I just bitch and moaned about working on this video, but that's because when Pathologic news comes out, I am like a dog with a bone. I want to get the video out and not be done with it, but get it out into the world before, you know, too much time goes on. So if you've made it to this point, I really appreciate it. I know, I think some of my theories are pretty cool. I think some of them, especially pertaining to the Outlast trials, are probably a little off base, but it's been a lot of fun. So if you enjoyed, please consider giving a like and subscribe. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the YouTube algorithm as well. And come hang out with us in Discord. I stream over on Twitch pretty consistently and would love to see you there as well. Also, before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to the members of the Patreon who usually get YouTube videos early, but they didn't get this one early because Pathologic news is cut off the table. But anyways, they get YouTube videos early. So really appreciate you guys. Thank you for helping make videos like this possible. If you're interested in the Patreon benefits, please go to the link below and check that out. Additionally, I want to say a huge shout out to Make, who's one of my bestest of Pathologic friends in the world. She is such a good soundboard and has such a wealth of knowledge. So make sure you go follow her on Twitter for more Pathologic content and just more cool content in general. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.